What does right-wing billionaire Peter Thiel think is the greatest threat to humanity? Climate change, war, pandemics, runaway AI? No, it's world government. Hi, I'm Barry Stevens, and welcome to How to Rule the World. Peter Thiel is the founder of PayPal, along with Elon Musk, and the chair of data and military giant Palantir. He also sponsored J.D. Vance's political career, who's now vice president of the United States. And he's one of the most influential libertarian thinkers on the planet. And in the summer of 2025, he gave an interview to the New York Times, in which he stated his greatest fear was godless world government. Here he is.
The atheist philosophical framing is one world or none. That was a short film that was put out by the Federation of American Scientists in the late 40s. Starts with a nuclear bomb blowing up the world, and obviously you need a one world government to stop it. One world or none.
Now, this little movie from 1946 is mostly forgotten, but it was part of an effort by the atomic scientists who built the bombs that were dropped on Japan, who thought that the only way to avoid a nuclear war was to unite the world politically. Two of the leaders of the movement were Oppenheimer and Einstein.
It is therefore an imperative necessity that all the nations of the world unite to avert catastrophe. The United Nations must establish a worldwide control of atomic energy and of other weapons of mass destruction.
And for Thiel, this sounds like world government, the Antichrist.
The Christian framing, which in some ways is the same question, is Antichrist or Armageddon. You have the one world state of the Antichrist, or we're sleepwalking towards Armageddon. One world or none, Antichrist or Armageddon, on one level are the same question.
This person is an absolute expert on the end of days and the coming of the Antichrist. Please welcome Mr. Peter Thiel.
Peter Thiel knows about the Antichrist. Peter Thiel knows about the Antichrist.
I'm Peter Thiel and I know about the Antichrist.
Let's learn about the Antichrist today.
Look, a one world state is hardly a possibility right now. So why is a guy like Thiel worried about it? Maybe he recognizes that there is a danger in the idea. And the idea did once seem possible. And that's the story I want to tell today, about how the men and women who built the atomic bomb wanted to take it away from the only country that had it, the United States of America, and put it and atomic power in the hands of an international body, creating something pretty close towards a world government. And it almost succeeded. Leading this effort were the two most famous scientists in the world, J. Robert Oppenheimer, the so-called father of the atomic bomb, and Albert Einstein, the man whose work made the bomb possible. So how did this even happen? Well, let's go back to before the Second World War. It was Einstein, of course, along with Leo Szilard, who signed the letter to President Roosevelt before the war that helped set in motion the Manhattan Project to build the bomb. And Oppenheimer, of course, was its scientific head. Einstein later said that the letter was the only thing in his life that he regretted. But the bomb was designed and built and detonated in New Mexico in 1945 under Oppenheimer's direction. That he was a very conflicted man. Most of the scientists who signed up for making the atomic bomb did it because they feared Hitler was making one. Once the Nazis were defeated, a lot of them didn't want it used at all. Some wanted it to be demonstrated to the Japanese as a warning. Others, like Szilard himself, organized a petition to stop it being used. But the army never let these views get anywhere close to President Truman. Oppenheimer himself was deeply worried and conflicted, but he wanted it dropped on a city. Why? Well, he may have thought that only the horror of destroying a city would make people realize that war was now suicide, that they wouldn't understand it until it was used, and then it might bring about an end to war itself. So they did use it. Twice, of course, killing hundreds of thousands of Japanese, as Oppenheimer said, against an essentially defeated enemy. In the fall of 1945, Oppenheimer resigned from Los Alamos, where the bomb was designed.
The peoples of this world must unite, or they will perish. This war that has ravaged so much of the earth has written these words. The atomic bomb has spelled them out for all men to understand.
And the military and the president seemed to think they would have a permanent monopoly on the bomb. But all the atomic scientists knew this wasn't true. The principles were widely known. It was just a matter of time before the USSR got this terrible weapon. That would spark an arms race with the Russians. Sooner or later, that would end in another world war, they thought, which would inevitably involve nuclear weapons. And that war would destroy civilization on Earth, as it would and still might. Right after the war, Oppenheimer appealed for the USA to place the bomb in the hands of an international body. This is pretty world-shaking. Oppenheimer was the most famous scientist in the world at this point, and here he was advocating the US give it up. But for Einstein, Oppenheimer didn't go far enough. He said, "The atomic bomb has changed everything except our way of thinking, and we thus drift towards unparalleled catastrophe." This grandfatherly image of Einstein, of the cuddly old genius with fuzzy hair that pop culture gives us, it excludes how radical he really was. A lifelong socialist, a pacifist, until the Nazis came along anyway. And he wasn't much for patriotism. He said, nationalism is an infantile sickness. It's the measles of the human race. And no wonder the FBI spied on him. Now, in 1945, the United Nations was just getting started. Einstein thought it was far too weak. The great power veto that the US and others had would just make it impotent. And for him, the only solution to prevent another world war was a real world government, a world state, federal, democratic, based in law, but with real power.
No place on earth is safeguarded against certain total destruction. The only hope for protection lies in the securing of peace in a supranational way. A world government must be created which is able to solve conflicts between nations and which gives it the sole disposition of offensive weapons.
Oppenheimer did manage to get a meeting with President Truman. After all, he was the most famous scientist in the world at this point, other than Einstein. The president gave him just half an hour, and it did not go well. Truman asked Oppenheimer when he thought the Soviets would get the bomb. Then he answered his own question. Never. Oppenheimer was stunned. He mumbled, "Mr. President, I feel I have blood on my hands." Well, that was kind of the end of the meeting. And later Truman said he never wanted to see that son of a bitch again. And he referred to the man who had led the creation of the worst weapon in human history. He called him a crybaby. But the idea of international control still took hold. And the president set in motion a plan to do just what Oppenheimer recommended. He appointed two of his most powerful advisors in the US to lead it. So why? Why did the president, who dropped the bomb and wanted the USA to be all-powerful, even consider this crazy idea? Well, Truman may have had a secret utopian dream of his own. He used to carry around in his wallet a poem by Lord Tennyson. In this poem, Tennyson dreams of a world war in the future, fought by airships, with a ghastly dew of bombs and poison raining down. This was written in 1837, long before air war. But the war ends, and the poem envisions a time when the battle flags were furled in the Parliament of Man, the federation of the world. There the common sense of most held a fretful realm in awe, and the kindly earth shall slumber, lapped in universal law. Truman, who'd inherited President Roosevelt's plan for the United Nations, used to take this poem out of his wallet and show it to people at the founding of the UN. Was he sincere? Anyway, Truman authorized the plan for international control. The result was the Acheson-Lilienthal Report, but it was Oppenheimer who wrote it. His plan was to form an international body called the Atomic Development Agency that had real power, not just inspection. It would actually control all the uranium mining and refining anywhere in the world, and they would control nuclear power plants. And sooner or later, the USA would literally have to turn its nuclear bombs over to this agency controlled internationally. This would happen in stages, but this was utterly radical. Oppenheimer was fulfilling his hero Niels Bohr's dream.
And it can establish patterns of cooperation among nations, the extension of which may even contribute to the solution of the problem of war itself. It proposes that in the field of atomic energy, there be set up a world government, that in this field there be renunciation of national sovereignty, that in this field there be no legal veto power, that in this field there be international law.
This was the time that the Federation of American Scientists made one world or none.
Representatives of the peoples of the world must together make laws which will abolish war, the great fusing force of one world. The choice is clear. It is life or death.
Now, of course it didn't happen. Our one world is still divided. We have big problems like climate change, massive inequality, pandemics. And of course, we don't have peace. 80 years after Hiroshima, we may be drifting towards World War again. And the whole period of this weird idealism, this little movie, and all that it represented are mostly forgotten. But not by everyone. Even now, 80 years later, the idea still frightens Peter Thiel.
The default political solution people have for all these existential risks is one world governance. You know, what do you do about nuclear weapons? We have a United Nations with real teeth that controls them, and they're controlled by an international political order. You know, what do we do about AI? And we need global compute governance. I would describe as the one world totalitarian state. The way the Antichrist would take over the world is you talk about Armageddon nonstop. You talk about existential risk nonstop, and this is what you need to regulate.
In other words, people who propose global solutions to global problems are a real threat, at least to the world of right-wing billionaires. People like Greta Thunberg.
In our world, it's far more likely to be Greta Thunberg.
Thiel thinks that the Antichrist might be Greta Thunberg, someone who warns about catastrophe and thinks we have to work together to prevent it. Or a long time ago, people like Oppenheimer and Einstein. But how did this idea for international control, an idea backed by the US president, how did it get stopped? Well, it's a good story, and it's one we'll tell in the next episode.